Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. If you want to do us a favor, please share this podcast with everybody that you know. That's all you have to do. Spread it far and wide. Cheers and see you out there. I don't think we have a six-pack in Bill Simmons parlance, but I think we have a four-pack. And why don't we start off? We want to hit China. We want to hit Canada. There's a new Japanese government. But let's start off on what has really been the theme of the podcast the last two episodes and just kind of update that the United States has been mercurial, for lack of a better word, on its foreign policy towards Russia. It's sort of, there's going to be a deal, there's not going to be a deal, we're friends with Vlad, we're not friends with Vlad. But it feels like a real inflection point this last week because the Treasury Department announced major sanctions against Russian oil companies, specifically Rosneft and Lukoil. And this is about 55% of Russian oil production. It's still one of the key pillars of the Kremlin's budget revenues. Just in 2024, Rosneft by itself was about 6 trillion rubles in taxes. There's also the question, as always with the Trump administration, there's questions of specificity. So how are these going to be implemented? How in particular are they going to enforce them with secondary sanctions on energy partners like China and India and even Turkey? But I will say, when you've got Ukraine going after Russian energy infrastructure, which we've talked about. Now you've got the U.S. coming out and saying, by the way, we were providing the intelligence for that, and here are the first real sanctions against Russia from the U.S. since Trump came to power. Looks like the walls continue to close in on President Vladimir Putin more and more. What is your take on this? Is it important? Is it just part of Trump's melodrama? Do you agree? I pulled some things from Polymarket. Maybe we'll do a whole segment on this, and maybe Polymarket folks will listen. They rate a 7% chance of a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire by November 30th. I thought that was an interesting one to juxtapose with the things that we're talking about. I'll let you take it from there, Marko.
That seems like a good, cheap flyer to take. I think it's probably not 7%. It's probably like 15%. But nonetheless, it doesn't really matter. The point is, it is low. I think November 30th is a very short-term contract, so I don't think we can have a ceasefire by then. But look, I think it's pretty clear to everyone that neither side is moving on the battleground. I think President Putin wants to give it one more go over the course of the next couple of months. The ground will be frozen. You can have a nice winter offensive. And I think he's hoping for that. President Trump doesn't like that. He wants a deal, and he wants a deal for a number of different reasons. Whichever camp you're in American domestic political battle, you have a different reason. If you're in the left-wing camp, you think that he wants it so he can win the Nobel Prize. If you're in the right-wing camp, you think it's because he wants the war to end. If you're somewhere in the middle, you think it can be both. So a couple of things I would say. I think this is a big deal. There was news reports that the Chinese were actually already stopping importing oil as a consequence. So we will see how that gets, sort of played out. But I think it's a big deal, and it's a much bigger deal than the Tomahawks. Tomahawks got a lot of playtime in the media. I would pump the brakes a little bit on their relevance. Tomahawks can be picked up by an S-400. I'm also not quite sure what delivery mechanism or how the Ukrainians would fire them, what would be the means by which they would actually use them. So I think that it would have taken several months, maybe even as much as 6 months, to deliver, train, and get Ukrainians to be actually firing these weapons. And I think that they don't really matter. Ukrainians are already accomplishing what they need to with drones and with some of the cruise missiles they received from the United Kingdom. So I think that we all kind of over-indexed on this new weapon system. Zelensky was clearly disappointed he didn't get it. But the truth is that I think it's completely irrelevant. Russia has surface-to-air missiles that can defeat the Tomahawks. I think drones are doing a fantastic job from Ukrainian perspective. And so I think that this is a very serious ratcheting of tensions. We finally are starting to get some of the sanction regimes that many proponents of tough sanctions have been calling for 3.5 months. So yeah, I think the news is tightening around Russia. Not tight enough, by the way, for them to cry uncle tomorrow, but enough for them to kind of know, like, okay, we have 3 to 4 months, 3 to 6 months to see what we win, and then we are going to have to sue for peace.
Yeah, I mean well, first of all, I think we should have a drinking game with our podcast. Anytime either one of us resorts to saying ratcheting of tensions, everybody should have to take a shot. I used to make fun of when I was in my editor phase at Stratfor. I used to make fun of anybody who ratcheting of tensions or geopolitical pillars or geostrategic calculus.
Oh,
These
yeah.
are all things that would listeners should take a shot of a vodka or Slivovitz as we're talking. I thought the Treasury Department press release on this was actually kind of stark. It said, I'll quote from it, "The ultimate goal of sanctions is not to punish, but to bring about a positive change in behavior." It kind of softens the move there. And I think also, I mean, one of the interesting things to consider here is that, European countries are still buying oil from Russia. One of the interesting things about Trump's is it a U-turn? I don't think you can call it a U-turn because, like, after 5 U-turns, you're basically just going in a circle. But he's been going after Europe for buying energy from Russia and telling Europe that he's ready for even more sanctions if they will stop buying oil from Russia. And the Treasury Department's sort of release suggests that unless European countries and companies want to be subject to secondary sanctions themselves, they have to reconsider importing energy by November 21st. So I'm curious how the Europeans will react to this too, because if the Europeans stop buying and if the Chinese start to get a little bit shy on buying, Russia's liquidity is going to quickly dry up. It's already been less than you'd think. And, the Saudis are just sitting there pumping, like stealing market share and happy to eat up the market share as all these things happen. So
a couple of things, reactions to what you're saying. The fact that European countries are still buying Russian crude needs to be really amplified because there's a lot of this criticism of Trump as being like easy on Trump and then fake hard and easy. The West as a collective has not wanted to go full force against Russia since day one. This isn't like a Trump thing. There was a playbook. There was a playbook that worked with Iran that President Obama used successfully to bring Iran to the negotiating table. And it's called secondary sanction regime, going right after, going against those who buy Iranian crude. And there was a chance to use it. The Obama administration and Europeans chose not to do it. Why? Because Russia chose to invade Ukraine at a time when the CPI in the United States of America was at 10%. So, of course, the number one political issue was not the safety and well-being of Ukrainians. The number one political issue in the West was inflation. So, but then inflation came down, and yet still the Biden administration and Europeans chose not to go after the Russian regime with those tough sanctions. So I just think it's appropriate to remind everyone what you just said, which is that yes, Europeans are even still buying crude.
And I'll put some statistics on that. Just that I should have led with this. So at least as we're looking at so far this year, I think this is year-to-date stats. It might be, it looks like year-to-date stats. Europe has spent about 1.15 billion euros on Russian fossil fuels. I'm sorry. This is just in August. So this is giving you a monthly picture. So in August.
That sounds like monthly figure.
Yeah, monthly figure, sorry. The 5 largest European importers account for 85% of the total, and 2 of those importers actually have a special exemption from the EU itself because of
Hungary and Slovakia.
So they're the top 2. Who do you think are the other top 3 countries that round up the top 5 European buyers of Russian fossil fuels still?
I will guess Greece, Italy, and let's say Poland. Or Czech Republic.
I would have made similar guesses, but it's France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. So you put together Hungary and Slovakia with France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. You get 85% of what the Europeans are importing from Europe going forward, from Russia going forward. So not going to be great for those countries. Pretty stark to see Germany not on that list, by the way. I think Germany gets a lot of shit for not having pivoted, but Germany has arguably pivoted more than most of these other countries that are so dependent or who bet so much on cheap Russian energy.
And look, alternatives can be found. Like, right? And so that's where the question is, why has it taken it so long? And no, President Trump is not the only one who has flip flopped or not gone as hard as maybe he could have. But the reality is that, yes, this will definitely help to bring Russia to the negotiating table, much more so than the tomahawks. And I think that's being lost right now. If you're listening to this podcast just to kind of get us general sense of what's going on in the world, I would say to you that tomahawks are a non-issue. I think they're an issue symbolically, like, hey, cool, we got tomahawks. What else will come? So in that way, it was disappointing for Kiev to not get them, but they would not have been a game changer. The drones are a game changer, and they continue to be a game changer. I think the ratcheting of economic pressure on Russia is much bigger deal, and it does show that when President Trump said no to the tomahawks but says yes to sanctions, that is not like good for Russia. It would have been much better for Russia if the Ukrainians were given yet another cruise missile instead of this issue, because ultimately the U.S. could have given them like 12 tomahawks, which would do nothing. Whereas with sanctions, that is a big deal if, as you pointed out, they actually start to use them. If they actually use them. Now, what's interesting is when you read the Treasury report, like you notice that language, not to punish, but to change behavior. It's interesting. There's the Trump administration has certainly changed the rhetoric towards Russia, and it's much more conciliatory. It's much more respectful. On one hand, Russia's a nuclear power, one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. It's not Al Qaeda, so there is a level of respect that it deserves as a country, as a sovereign. On the other hand, they they'd invade Ukraine and have killed hundreds of thousands of people in the process of doing so. So it's interesting, and I think that on one hand, I want to just objectively say, yes, that's probably how countries should talk to one another. It's not really smart to use value and norms when conducting foreign policy. It's just not necessary. It makes deal making harder. On the other hand, I wonder if the Trump administration, and I want to know what you think about this, I just know that, there is this narrative, particularly on the conservative side of the debate, that Russia could be flipped as an ally against China. And I do believe that J.D. Vance, the vice president, has in the past said that it was a great, great mistake by the Biden administration to have sort of caused the Ukraine war, which was obviously a political statement. But then, because, hey, we could have just gotten in the bed with Putin and it would have been easy to now have this huge ally against China. And do you share my thoughts? Is this something do you think is motivating the rhetoric, the sort of, displays of respect to Russia, that there's this hope that once a ceasefire deal is made with Ukraine, we can go back to being pals, and it's a tool, it's an arrow in the quiver against the epic generational fight against China.
Yeah, I want to reference what you said in our last podcast about decoupling with China, which is there's what Trump wants and thinks about this, and then there's what the bureaucracy and everybody else thinks about it. And it's clear as day to me that Trump is not thinking strategically. He just ping-pongs back and forth from thing to thing. If we're recording Friday, October 24th, this will probably be out first thing tomorrow morning, if not later today. But if we'd been recording on Monday, as we were considering doing, instead of leading with Putin and sanctions on oil companies, we would have led with the acrimonious exchange between Zelensky and Trump in Washington over last weekend, in which Trump, there are all these amazing stories coming out of that meeting, by the way. This time we don't get it on television, but I wish they had, because apparently Zelensky had all these maps, and Trump was basically like, I don't care about the maps, stop showing me the maps, I don't care about the maps, if you don't do what I say, Putin's gonna destroy you. He wants to escalate. Apparently, this is from the Washington Post. A diplomat who was in the room said that Trump was going on and on about his grievances of not having gotten a Nobel Peace Prize while they were talking about this. Trump even apparently said he didn't tell Zelensky to give up the Donbass. He just said, I'll quote him now, let it be cut the way it is. Leave it the way it is now. They can negotiate something later down the line. So he literally just wants the conflict to be over and to take credit for it. But all of which is to say, I think Trump really is motivated by that. I think he wants to have played a role in ending the conflict so he can buttress his Nobel Peace Prize application. And then I think you have others in his administration who are thinking in these strategic terms about, can we do the reverse Nixon maneuver? Can we get Russia on side against China? And I guess, I think we even talked about that earlier in the year. Maybe J.D. Vance thinks that. If he does, though, he's a lot dumber than I thought he was. And I didn't have that high of an estimation of his intelligence. But the idea that you're going to flip Russia against China, A, means you understand nothing about Russia, and B, means you have a supreme overestimation of what Russia as an ally will mean against China. Like, it's not going to help you a whole heck of a lot. And if you're not even willing to stick out your neck and say you're going to defend Taiwan or South Korea or some of these other countries from Chinese aggression, if you're going to take Russia on as an ally, you better be prepared to say that you're going to defend Siberia and Vladivostok from Chinese aggression too, because that's all part of China. Like, from China's perspective, the Russians are just another bunch of Europeans who took their territory. They would like it back at some point. I'm sure they will try and take it back at some point. So my answer to your question is, I'm sure that there are people who think that within the administration, but it's foolish.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's foolish.
Well, I will add a reason it's foolish. I think it's foolish primarily. So first of all, maybe we disagree on this. I think you were just riffing, but of course, if Russia stops sending energy to China, it would be awesome. But where else is it going to send that energy? It's not going to impoverish itself on your behalf. Like Canada's not going to do that on America's behalf, let alone Russia. But I think the reason it's foolish is because it assumes the Russians are complete morons. And what I mean by that is that if there's one country that can objectively say that they've been led astray by Americans, it is Russia. Whether it's their original grievance on NATO expansion, which I kind of don't really agree with the Russians on. Nobody really promised that NATO would not be expanded. It was always kind of nebulous.
Yeah.
But
show us the receipts, Vladimir. We want to see the receipts. Where's the document?
But the truth is, show us the contract. In other words, America was not as dumb as Minnesota Timberwolves to give, who was it, Joe Smith, the contract under the table. Deep reference there for like four listeners who will get that one. But my point is more, the reason that Russians are not stupid is because they've just watched America flip-flop between like such dramatic political and ideological parties. Any deal that they make with Donald Trump will be worth for the next 2.5 years. And that's the problem. Like, fundamentally, that's why there cannot be a reverse Nixon, because there's no continuity in American politics on this. I think that's it. Now, the one thing I would disagree with you on is Trump and Nobel Peace Prize. We don't have to go on this. I think objectively the war has to end. Mm-hmm. Like that's like an objective truth. Now, it's my truth, and I can't make it happen. So clearly I'm not biased by my candidacy for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think that you can make a very, very strong argument, which I could, that Ukrainian position is actually anti-Ukrainian. And they just are being led by a man who's uncompromising and who was an incredible leader in February of 2022, but in October 2025, he's like the wrong person for the country. Zelensky, hero, uncompromising, great wartime leader. The war's over, buddy.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no way, no way for Ukraine to reclaim those territories, no matter what weapons the West gives them, unless it gives them men. And that will not happen. So, as such, the war, for the sake of Ukraine, the war must end at these borders. And so I actually 100% agree with Trump's alleged statement, just give it to them and then we'll figure it out later. Like, that's absolutely what the policy for Ukraine should be objectively. But I also cannot prove that he is not uttering those words purely because of the Nobel Peace Prize. So in other words, this is one of those situations where both liberals and conservatives can be right at the same time, and we just don't know. Maybe he just kind of fell into the right strategy due to his wish to get a Nobel Peace Prize. But I can defend that. I mean, and this is where I think the more of a liberal line in the U.S. Obviously now it has to be because liberals hate Trump. The liberal argument is like, no, Trump is wrong. We need to continue. Continue what? There is 0% chance for the Ukrainians to reclaim these territories. And the more they continue to do so, they will waste their resources at that endeavor, which will hurt Ukraine in the long term. I mean, it's time to pause. And by pause, I mean for the next decade, rebuild Ukraine, turn it into a sophisticated economy with advanced technology. And I almost would be willing to bet that in 2035, 2045, there's going to be a moment when these territories say, hey, this was a mistake. Like, we want to come back to Ukraine. By then, who knows what's going to happen with Russia? Mm-hmm. And you and I share the same dystopian view of Russian future. So, like, you should be on this side with me. Like, let's just freeze the conflict and then wait for Russia to collapse. Done. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we still wasting?
You're right that you and I do disagree on Zelensky, and we've disagreed on Zelensky since the Oval Office moment because you thought it was a terrible mistake, and I think it was actually planned by Zelensky, and I think that he's done well. I think he's actually one of the only leaders who appreciates how to use television and social media and things like that almost as well as Trump. I think he's in some ways his equal. Yeah. And I think every time Zelensky feels like he's not getting the support he needs from the Europeans, all he needs is a meeting with Trump and to get, pictures out there or stories out there about how awful Trump is, and he can call up all of the European leaders and say, like, hey, what's going on? Like, I need your support. And to your point, I mean, you've talked about Ukraine as a garrison state. That's your concept. I don't want to steal that, but I will say that if Ukraine does want to be Europe's garrison state, it actually helps to have an ongoing smoldering war. Now, you can't be sacrificing Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines, but as we've talked about, that's not really what Ukraine is doing right now. The Russians are doing that. Thousands of Russian soldiers are dying on the front lines for, microscopic gains on the map, whereas the Ukrainians are using drones and they're defending the positions that they currently have. I don't think Zelensky would admit this. If the Trump proposal was, hey, give up Donetsk and Luhansk and you get back the portions of Kherson and Zaporizhia that Russia currently holds, I bet who knows? I bet Zelensky would have to take that. But if he's supposed to you're taking Donetsk and Luhansk and you're taking Zaporizhia and Kherson, and you also already have Crimea, that I think is a non-starter for him. So I actually think there is a universe, at least from Zelensky's point of view, is if he can defend Ukraine with mostly drones and mostly defensively, and he's not wasting Ukrainian manpower in, delusional offensives that he or seizing Russian territory. That was a massive mistake. I think he's been disabused of those things. I think the policy that he's currently following right now makes some sense to me because you want to keep the Europeans on side. But I hear your point. I mean, the chief goal should be to end the conflict, and that I think is where Trump has his finger on the pulse of what most people want. Most people are sick of this thing. They just want the war to be over. And Trump's strategy is literally, guys, just stop shooting. Like, we'll figure out the rest later. Will you just please stop shooting and say that I told you to stop shooting and that's why you did it? And then we'll figure all the rest of it out, which is just not going to work for either guy, I don't think. Anyway.
But just one thing that you said, it's like Zelensky has option A, option B. That doesn't exist, Jacob. Like, Russians are in all of these territories, and there's no way to move them. And I think the bigger issue is option C, which is that Russians want that remaining part of Donetsk they haven't received. And that obviously sits very poorly with Zelensky, who's been fighting for this for 3.5 years. But there is no bargaining. Like, there's no bargaining without capability. So if you don't have the capability to return these territories, what is there to discuss? And that's where I align 100% with Trump's goal in a way, not necessarily his reasoning. His reasoning may be the Nobel Peace Prize. Let's leave that aside. But the reality is, like, Ukraine, when he says Ukraine doesn't hold the cards, it means that Ukraine cannot return these territories. Now, yes, they can continue to attack Russia with, and make the economy collapse. Russia can continue to kill civilians in Ukraine. So that can go on forever. That's my point. Like, that's where this conflict really has, there's nothing Ukraine can do to return these territories.
Yeah, but it's funny. Nobody has the cards. Because there's nothing Trump.
Yes,
there's nothing.
That's why it should stop.
There's nothing Trump can do.
But that's why Donald. Yeah. But Trump is not the one fighting. He's not playing poker. He's saying, guys, He's coming in. It's like it's 5 a.m. Your wives are going to be super mad. Okay, we need to just stop this game. Let's just count out the chips. You guys won. It's 5 a.m. Like you'll get in trouble when you get home. That's Trump. He's like, I got to go to sleep. I got to take the kids to school the next morning. The point is, I think that somehow magically he is come at the right time. And yes, he might be motivated by the Nobel Peace Prize, but he's right. Like the war should just end. And you know why, Jacob, I say this? I say this because of our thesis, your and I. You cannot ignore our thesis that Russia is in trouble for the next 10 years. If we had a different view, if Russian demographics were great, if they were technological leader in AI, if they were not bankrupt, if they didn't lose 1 million people, then I think you could argue Ukraine should continue to fight. But actually, because Russia is on thin ice, it's even more the reason to just freeze the conflict and let it play out over the next 10 years. And I think that's where Trump's statement, like, we'll figure it out later, is actually profoundly wise, even if motivated by narcissism.
Yeah. The last thing I just want to say, I don't want to defend the Europeans too much because I think they are weenies, as you can see from their Russian oil imports and everything else. But I will say, I just want to do them some credit. EU imports from Russia have changed markedly since before the war. So, I mean, they've cut their petroleum oil imports from Russia by a factor of 14 over the last 4 years. So they're still importing like a sizable amount, but it's much less than it used to be. Iron and steel, natural gas, nickel, they've cut a lot more. But there's one actually that stands out here, which is fertilizer. European purchases of fertilizer from Russia have actually increased since 2021. So if we have any European listeners who are buying fertilizer from the Russians, will you please shoot me an email? I have better options for you. I don't know what the fuck you're doing, but you're not helping anything. Okay. Anything else to say about Russia before we hit our second beer here, Marko?
It's getting cold.
Yeah, it's getting cold. It is getting cold. It's not getting cold in New Orleans. But okay, let's talk. I want to put Canada in front next before we go to China, and maybe we'll segue into it.
Smart.
So the province of Ontario, which is led by Doug Ford, you're going to have to help me out here. That Ontario has a premier, and like to the extent that this represents the Canadian government. Anyway, so the province of Ontario put out this ad that takes a quote from Ronald Reagan in 1987 about how tariffs are bad for trade. And the Ronald Reagan Foundation has said that this is taking Ronald Reagan out of context. Trump has seized on this and said that it's a fraudulent ad and that he's terminating all negotiations, trade negotiations with Canada effectively immediately because of this horrible ad that Canada has put out. There were also, that's sort of classic Trump. You had the Kevin Hassett, who's the director of Trump's National Economic Council, try to explain this a little bit more, which is to say this frustration has built up over time. Quote, the Canadians have been very difficult to negotiate with, end quote, which is sort of a strange sentence. It's like, yeah, of course, yeah, like they're negotiating. Like that's sort of the point of negotiation. Anyway, I won't go far down.
You threatened their independence.
Mark Carney, I thought, had a good take. He came out earlier today on Friday and said that Canada was ready to resume trade talks whenever Donald Trump was ready to start resuming trade talks again. I sort of said to you on X, like, what is your over-under on how quickly Trump gives in on this? Is it 7 days? Anyway, it's a pretty stark thing, and this back and forth with Mexico is a soap opera. I'll put my cards on the table. I'll just say that I have put Canada and Mexico in a fundamentally different category than every other country in the world from the point of view of U.S. trade policy. I think a deal gets done. I think this is all a soap opera. We will be watching this soap opera probably until the end of next summer when they need to have the USMCA renegotiated, and it's just back and forth. I will say, though, like it's one of my highest confidence takes right now, which means when something like this happens, I have to be like, well, that's a serious challenge to what I'm talking about. Like Trump literally just terminated all the trade talks, so maybe I shouldn't be so glib about it. Where are you at with this new episode in the Canada versus U.S. showdown?
Look, I mean, I think this is a complete non-event. You know, what trade deal? For what? 15% of trade? So USMCA covers 85% of Canada, US. In theory, it's less because many companies in Canada and Mexico and America were too lazy to apply for exemptions of tariffs because they were the same pre-Trump. And so now, obviously, if you're a Canadian trade lawyer, you're making a killing because everyone's coming in to get those USMCA exemptions. But for those listeners who don't understand this, when President Trump raised tariffs on Canada, he did that sectorally. And a broad swath of Canada-US trade is actually not affected by those tariff increases. So when you actually do a calculation and you try to blend all these tariffs together, Canada's tariff rate has gone from like non-existent to 5.9%. So yes, there's like a 6% tariff on the average good that Canada sends to the US, from 0 effectively to 6. That sucks. Switzerland is eating like 22% tariffs on average. Germany is eating 13% tariffs, 13.8. So Canadian tariff, their average tariff rate is much lower than that of their other competitors. And when I say competitors, I mean competitors to access the American market. So Canada has won the trade war. Mexico tariffs are a little bit lower as well, but of course Mexico's competitors are a little bit different from Canada's. The point is, this is a non-event. Canada doesn't need a trade deal until the USMCA gets renegotiated next summer. And what I think Mark Carney is correctly doing is he's correctly looking at the polls. Tariffs are universally reviled by Americans, particularly the farmers in the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, the kind of folks who actually trade with Canada and Mexico quite a bit. And so what Mark Carney is saying is like, look, it's October 2025. By June, July 2026, I think you'll be in a worse negotiating position with me because there'll be even less support for tariffs by then. Mm-hmm. And so, cool. Like, we don't have to talk. That's why I took the over on your question on X. Will this be resolved in the next 7 days? And my answer is no. I don't think it will, because Canada doesn't need a trade deal. It needs USMCA to be renegotiated, and I think the chances of that are 95%. When the time comes, I'm sure President Trump will do something symbolic to punch Canada in the face. That's fine. He'll want something in order to, but I think USMCA gets rolled over. And so effectively, Canada and Mexico don't really need to negotiate with Trump. That's why I cannot believe that this is leading the news on October 23rd and October 24th, because it just shows that people don't know the data. They don't know the statistics. They don't know the reality. What trade deal do Canada and the US, what trade deal are they talking about? For what? For 15% of trade that's not under USMCA? Who cares?
Yeah, not to put myself in defense of the media here, but I think what's going on there is a fear that, and I think I'm right about this. I'm not neither one of us are lawyers here, so if there's an international trade lawyer who listens to this and wants to make it more complex, feel free to email us. But my understanding is that the USMCA basically a joint review is required by July 1st of next year, and all three countries have to decide whether the term of the deal is extended for another 16 years. And I view everything that's happening in US, Mexico, Canada trade relations as like those negotiations have already started. Like, this is not necessarily about the piddly amounts of trade that you're talking about. This is a longer sort of tail negotiation that is going into the USMCA. I think the reason it's leading is because people are unsure enough about President Trump and what he's going to do to suggest, will he pull out of USMCA? Will he refuse to assent to it going forward? Now, I'm with you. I'm probably higher than 95%. I'm higher than 95% because I just think it would be absolutely catastrophic for the United States to do that. It would be asinine, stupid, whatever fancy word you want to put in there. It would just be incredibly dumb. And the Trump administration is many things. It's not just willfully stupid in this way. I mean, all administrations can make mistakes, but like to cut your nose off to spite your face in this sense would be kind of silly. I also think that I got this question from Dimitri Kofinas on X when I posted that, whether I thought this was part of Trump's negotiating style or whether there was some kind of strategy going on here. And I just want to, there is no strategy here. I think that the thing that makes Trump so good in many situations is that he has a great tactical and instinctual knows for power and narrative and things like that. And he might have the short term here, but to your point, in the long term, the data is with renegotiation of the USMCA. And everything that the Trump administration has done on trade requires that the USMCA be extended and be buttoned up. So none of that sort of makes sense to me.
But a lot of our listeners...
Yeah, go ahead.
So sorry to interrupt. I just want to double click on two things. Let's leave the strategy for a little bit later. Mm-hmm. You should bring that in because I don't think it has anything to do with Canada, Mexico, if there is a strategy. But your point, the problem with your point, Jacob, is that although I agree with it, many of our listeners don't. And they'll say well, it hasn't prevented him from doing stupid things in the past. Using ChatGPT to set tariffs seems dumb. Putting tariffs on penguins doesn't seem like a right thing to do. And so I don't want to rely on your very logical, rational argument for why USMCA has to extend it. Instead, I'm going to just rely on something far more callous and glib, which is polling. And I got to tell, anyone who wants to see the polls, look at my X. I mean, I've put this out. This is universally reviled. Literally, picking up American cities with a masked militia is more popular amongst Americans than tariffs. Having the National Guard go and fight people in frog costumes in Portland is more popular than tariffs.
Marko, how did you know that I'm supposed to be a frog for Halloween? My daughter's going to be Tatiana. I'm going to be a frog in the streets of New Orleans on October 31st. You just awesome. Painted a target on me, man.
Well, listen, I mean, it's fascinating. I'm actually kind of surprised by this, that the tariffs are so universally reviled. And while I'm in a violent agreement with the Trump administration that tariff-induced inflation will be transitory in the long term, I also know that when you increase prices of goods, you increase prices of goods. So the human being on the street, the regular human living in America, will not be thinking about whether or not these are transitory. And if they are transitory, it's because they're poorer for other reasons, so it's not a good thing. The point is, Americans will feel these tariffs. So if you're Carney, again, if I'm advising Mark Carney, I'm dude, bro, Jacob is right. This is about USMCA, but but I also believe you've got 8 months, just sit on it. Mm-hmm. Don't do anything. Just wait Trump out. And I think that's why I'm saying it's a non-event, because it's why would Canada negotiate now? Things are just going to get worse for the Trump administration on this issue. Even if the Trump administration is correct that eventually tariff inflation will not be a big deal, it will be a big deal in 6 months.
Yeah. It's also Carney didn't do anything. Carney's been following your advice. This is from the province of Ontario and Doug Ford. So it would be like if Mark Carney came out and said, I am terminating negotiations with the United States over trade because of a political ad that was aired in Mobile, Alabama that said, that Canada was the 51st state. You can't, it's not even sort of A to B, which is why I also think that maybe this has something more to do with something else, because the next tweet or the next X or truth or whatever we're supposed to call it after Trump went after Canada and talked about the termination of trade was he accused Canada of trying to influence the U.S. Supreme Court about the legality of his tariffs.
Awesome.
And I think that might be what has his panties in a wad. And you and I have talked about it. That is really uncertain. I'm not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. But I've read the Constitution. The Constitution is pretty clear. He does not have the authority to do a lot of these tariffs. So we'll see what his appointments on the Supreme Court have bought him. Maybe the Supreme Court will create some kind of interpretation that allows the tariffs to stay on. But everything Trump has said about this in recent weeks has been, it would be really bad if the tariffs went away. Cool, let's say we agree with that. It still says in Article 1, Section, I forget if it's 7 or 8, that it's Congress that has the power to raise and lower these things. So unless you've gone through the Commerce Department in Section 232 and blah, 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 those should probably be struck down. Which to your point, really amplifies your point. If you're Mark Carney, if you're literally anyone who's making a trade deal with the United States, and you're willing to take some risk, why don't you roll the dice and see if the Supreme Court strikes all these things down in a couple weeks? Because is it 50-50, 60-40? I don't know. I've been calling it a toss-up. I don't know where you're at.
I think it's probably 70-30 that it's all fine, for Trump. But it doesn't matter. I think we can already kind of start pivoting to the next point, which is, I think that Trump he needed to look tough. And you need to look tough because you're about to walk into South Korea and maybe not look so tough.
Mm-hmm.
And Canada is great. Canada is great because it's always there. It's almost always polite, and you can always kind of look tough by just being mean to Canadians. I think that's the thinking here in the Trump administration. So he blows up in a fit of rage over negotiations that are going to take 8 months, so the Canadians don't care. And it sets the stage up for a potential China deal where, I'm not sure that the US necessarily is going to look as tough. Now, I've seen a lot of commentary, Jacob, and I wonder what you think about this. Like The Economist, our favorite foil because it's such great journalism. But The Economist was basically bullshitting about how China has all the cards. And there's this it's so funny to me because I work with sophisticated investors. That's my day job. And every single hedge fund on the planet Earth in 2024 told me America has all the cards with China. Now, apparently, 18 months later, China has all the cards. Guys, nobody has the cards. It's not about the cards. It's about who's willing to take the pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. It's not about material strength. I mean, Russia invades Ukraine. Why isn't Ukraine defeated? America invades Vietnam, considered a loss. America invades Iraq. America invades Afghanistan. Who's in charge in Afghanistan? Excuse me very much. I believe it's Taliban. So what the fuck was the point? Why? Why? Because it's not about, you cannot just do an Excel spreadsheet and show who's more powerful. The question is who's willing to tolerate more pain. And so I don't think that China really has the cards because of rare earths. I mean, the US has semiconductors. So blah, blah, blah. There you go. It's a mutual assured destruction. The problem is that President Trump understands that he cannot really be the Grinch ahead of Christmas with 100% tariffs on toys. And I also think that the reality is, there's just no need or ability to decouple for both sides. But ultimately, it's President Trump who started the trade war, so he's the one who has to land the plane, not the Chinese. And that's where I don't think this is about rare earth as a sword of Damocles against the US. I think US has many swords of Damocles over China's head. It isn't about who is in a better position from a sort of sticks perspective. I think it's who's more willing to be poked by those sticks. And I just don't think that the US voter really cares about many of these issues. And so, yeah, I think we're going to have a trade deal, which really we should just call the truce. It's not going to be a grand bargain or anything like that. But I do think he's going to have to go to South Korea, and I think he's going to have to make one.
Yeah, I mean, you and I agree with what you're saying. I think you are underplaying the extent to which China does have asymmetric advantages in key areas because, China is sort of at the stage in its manufacturing development where the United States was in 1900 when William McKinley and then Teddy Roosevelt were throwing tariffs around all these other countries. Like China is roughly 35% of global manufacturing share. When you look at key products that the United States imports, whether it's things like telecom switches or active pharmaceutical ingredients in children's ibuprofen or machinery, the actual semiconductors themselves, not the design, but where they're getting them from. Like you start to go down the list, like it is dependent on China for lots of these things. And if you get China out of the supply chain, you're not going to have these things. So you're going to massively increase the price of goods for the average American consumer if you go after China in this way. And that's something that China can leverage, which is something we've talked about before, which again, that just amplifies your point that decoupling is going to be really, really hard for the United States. And I don't think it's controversial to say that probably the average Chinese person has a greater capacity for suffering than the average US citizen. And China has also authoritarian tools that it can use to enforce that suffering than the US government does. So I'm agreeing with you at the broad. I don't want to undercut the way in which China does have significant leverage here.
Well, we can go back to, for example, rare earths if you want to cook more on that. But let me just stop on this issue because I hear this a lot. China, 35% of global manufacturing, incredible. That's a huge card in this game of cards we're all keep playing. The problem is that it's infinitely easier to build a factory, to make something, than to build a consumer base to buy something. And so I disagree with this notion that China has the rest of the world by its balls because it makes stuff. The reason it makes stuff and then sells them is because fundamentally their final demand is domiciled within the borders of its geopolitical rivals. And that is insanity because China cannot gear up its own households to buy. So this is where, the nuance here is that no, China's in trouble because it has so many factories, because it produces so much stuff, but its consumers don't consume it for a number of reasons. There's a demographic issue, but more importantly, they're indebted because they all own 3 condos that they don't need. And so all this manufacturing China has built up goes to us. And so in a case of decoupling, which would be disastrous for both sides, but let's just be very clear, we can rebuild those factories. We absolutely can. If you're a listener and you're shaking your head in disagreement, you're a moron. I'm sorry to tell you this.
Oh, well, I'm with the morons here. I think you're wrong that it's infinitely easier to rebuild that capacity.
It's infinitely easy to build some idiotic thing where you need for ibuprofen compared to the difficulty of buying it. How do you get your population? What matters is not the capacity to produce. It's the capacity to consume. And China alone, unfortunately, does not have that. That's why they're exporting all of it. It's a vulnerability. It's not a strength. And so they cannot dangle this in front of the West's head as like, oh, you guys don't build anything. It's like, yeah, you don't consume anything, brother. So what happens if we decouple and you're stuck with like extra children's toys and toaster ovens? Like, I guess you're going to have, it's called unemployment. Whereas what we're going to do is invest in factories, employ, inefficient, untrained workers making crappier products than China would have. Fair, but we good. We've got both labor then, and we've got demand. You've got neither. And this is the thing we have to understand. China employs millions of people. But those jobs are leveraged to our consumption. And that's why I say the biggest sword of Damocles over China is that their final demand, which is a macroeconomic term, where is ultimately the demand for this product? Where is it? It's domiciled within the borders of China's enemies. That's a huge vulnerability. So I don't think that's really...
Yeah, I'm on the other side here. First of all, if it's that easy, then you and I should stop talking on the podcast. We should go start about 5 different companies that create these different products that we're no longer going to get from China 3 to 5 years from now.
Why would we? But why would we? Because they're not going to stop making it, Jacob. That's the point. The bet here... I mean, first of all, there is a lot of onshoring going on, and I think it's all going to... Look, the reason that I don't think you should onshore is because I don't think we can decouple. But it's not because we can't do it. Of course we can. We ramped up our military, like the West as a whole ramped up military in the late 1930s, before World War II. We're ramping up semiconductor fabs. Poorly, by the way, just to be clear. All of this can be rebuilt. Building a factory that produces stuff, I'm not saying that in absolute terms it's easy. But it's infinitely easier than getting your consumers to consume.
Yeah, I hear you, but I don't agree with you, and I also think you're overstating the extent to which China is exposed to the United States because China's
macro 101.
Because China. Well, I'm not an economist, thank God. I would not have a career if I had studied econ in college. I've told you this joke before. What does an economist say if you ask him what the economic impact of the French Revolution was? It's too soon to tell.
I don't know.
Too soon to tell. We can't tell you. That's what macro econ 101 is going to do for you. But I just want to say, no. I don't think that most of, yes, the U.S. enemy to China, bad if China loses access to that market. But, and this goes to the way that the Trump administration has rolled out its trade strategy, there's a whole other rest of the world that wants to buy Chinese products and that is increasingly less disposed to go along with the United States because of what the United States has done to those countries. So as long as China can still sell to those markets, then China's going to be fine. And then
yes, I agree with that.
You're absolutely right that Xi Jinping has to, and this has been the holy grail for Chinese leaders for 30 years, he has to get animal spirits going in China. And he needs Chinese people to buy Chinese goods and to buy Chinese stocks and everything else. That's going to be a huge socio-economic cultural change. But yes, I think that that's easier than thinking the United States is going to snap its fingers and it's going to be the 1940s again and we're going to be manufacturing like we were then. I don't think we have that capacity. I think
we don't have to manufacture like it's 40s. And the second thing that you are missing here is, and by the way, this is objectively like I'm right. Like this isn't one of those things where we actually have a debate. because we know that this is the case. Like, if it was easy, China would have boosted its consumption. Now they're talking about it at the current fourth plenum, and I think they're talking about it because they know I'm right. Like, this is their vulnerability. But just as your point is, China can replace US as a consumer. So let's double click on
Yeah.
that. US is still the largest economy in the planet. And so it's going to be difficult for you to replace the US with India, Indonesia, and Brazil. But you can go ahead and do it. And some listeners are going to say, but you're talking 1.5 billion people. Yes, but they're poorer than Americans. So no, America is the largest consumer market. So it can be done. There's an effort to do that by the Chinese. The problem is that China also can be replaced, not just with US manufacturing, but manufacturing out in all these countries as well. And this is literally what has been happening, but it's fake. And what I mean by that is that China is exporting more and more to countries like Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia and Brazil, but in many ways, intermediary goods that are assembled there and then sent to America. So final demand is still domiciled in American borders, whereas America feels better about diversifying its supply chain, but that's fake too, because ultimately the supply chain is still owned by China. And so it just reinforces the point that decoupling is difficult, which we agree
Mhm.
on, but it also reinforces the fact that you can build a factory in Kansas. You can also build it in Vietnam. You can build it in Malaysia. But final demand is not actually changing to these countries. It's still sourced in the West. Now, if Europe completely abandoned the US, in this kind of a rivalry with China, I think that you would probably be correct. I
That
think
by
that
the way,
that's
that's the real reverse Nixon maneuver. If China could pull that off, like
yes.
that's the real thing that the United States should be worried
Yes,
about.
no, and that would be critical. The problem with Europe too is that its demand is kind of flagging, and I expect all of this to kind of normalize over the next 10 years. I expect that you will be much more correct 10 years from now than you are now, and China is actively trying to do that because they know I'm right now, and so that's why the current debates in China are: should we pivot more to consumption? And the number one reason, the answer is yes. I mean, there's some answers for why they shouldn't, because indebtedness level of private capital, but like of the private sector. But the reason that they know that they should is because I'm right. Like, you cannot have your final demand be in borders of your enemies. I mean, if you do, you cannot be tough on those enemies then. Then rare earths, which is probably your second point, over where China does have legitimate levers. Well, how can you use those rare earths if you're going against your number one customer? The other issue I would also say is, like, let's not forget chips. China still does need, if they are making a big deal in this fourth plenum with the 5-year plan. They are making a big deal about technological breakthroughs. I don't understand how they do that without still American chips. So to your point about rare earths, what about
Yeah,
chips? How do
I
we?
don't really care about rare earths and chips. Semiconductors really are mutually assured destruction. There's no country in the world today that
Yes,
can do
I
this
agree.
start to finish by itself. So it's actually the perfect. It's one of the reasons I think it's the front
Yes.
line, because it is the one that is going to be decoupled last. A lot of these others can't. But I want to go back to what something you said at the very beginning, which I think is where we find common ground here, which is, too many people are talking about this as if there's cards to play or a chess game or it's back and forth. And I think the place that you're right, and I think what allows China to do this is some of the strengths and advantages I talked about. You're right that the Trump administration is trying to play, oh, we have this card and we have this card. If you don't do this, we're going to have tariffs. And China is just looking at the U.S. and being like, what are cards? Like, we just want to trade. So what is it you want us to say? What is it? What song and dance do you want us to do? Like, we'll do whatever you want. Like, we're not interested in going back and forth. You can see this in those, you remember when Trump hiked the tariffs up to 240%, and China was not literally, like, basically like, okay, like, we don't even know what a 240% tariff is. We're just going to max out at 120 or whatever it's at, and just call us.
Lower. I was like 60.
Just call us, like, when you're ready to talk. We'll just keep doing our thing until you're ready to talk, because this is a joke. Like, we don't really get it anymore. And I think that's how China looks at it. I think China's just waiting for the United States to come on and say, okay, fine, like, let's make the deal. And China will say, cool, we've been wanting to make the deal the whole time. We don't want to use cards. We're not interested in cutting these things off from.
But that's because I agree with you. That's 100%. There's only two times they lost their cool. One was the third country pressure by the Trump administration, which shows you that they understand that they do need that final demand to be available to them. They don't need to export stuff directly to America. They're cool with that. They've gone over that. Like, they know that they've lost that battle. But if you start pressuring Vietnam and Malaysia to not re-export Chinese goods they actually made a big deal out of that. That's when they lost their cool, and that's where the trade minister or negotiator came out and was like, hell no. The other time they lost their cool is when, in the middle of these negotiations, on October 2nd, the US came out with more export controls on chips. And we talked about this in the last podcast. But you're right. But again, why are the Chinese okay in not fighting a trade war? It's because they understand they just need more time.
Yeah.
They need more time to rebalance away from American demand. And someone's going to be listening to this podcast and be like, but Marko, Chinese exports to the US as percent of total exports have declined. Yes, but again, that's not measuring final demand. Many of Chinese exports to Malaysia or Vietnam end up in America. So it's like you need this reorganization of trade and growth and consumption to happen. And I think it will happen. Just to be clear, I think that American leverage on China over the next 10 years has to be reduced. Why? Because we cannot maintain the current level of consumption in the US that we've maintained over the last 5 years. But that also begs to the whole point that you're saying, which is why they're not really losing their cool, which is why they're saying, like, okay, cool, I guess we just have to get whatever deal Trump wants to get. Anyways, where do we start with all this? We start off with who's got the cards, right? And who's this and that. I think it's a stupid argument. We both agree. The point is, I think that there will be a deal. And I think that the punching of Canada in the face, on October 23rd is related to the fact that 7 days later, Trump basically has to go kind of land the plane that he took off in himself, which is the China-US.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you just said. I'm sure, I don't know the Sun Tzu quote off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's got to be some kind of Sun Tzu quote that sounds like the best way to fight a war is not to fight it, because that's what China's going to do. Like, the best way for them to fight the trade war is not to fight the trade war and just to trust things are going to happen over time. I also think, though, that overreaction in October underscores my point a little bit, which is to say, don't underestimate what China's leverage would look like if it did want to fight the war. Because I think China, to your point about semiconductors, like, the US struck a nerve there. And China said, okay, this was all fun now, but if you're going to do this, like, the gloves are going to come off a little bit. And it was no surprise to me that Besant was immediately walking it back. And Trump was immediately walking it back, because as soon as China bared their teeth, even a little bit, they were like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, this is all part of the negotiation. Like, let's not get too serious here. And then the last thing I'll just say is,
that's exactly what you said, yeah.
I agree with you 100% there's going to be a deal. Polymarket doesn't have, the Polymarket guys need to write to us. There's no, will there be a deal? There's, will Trump meet with Xi Jinping? But they need to do that. I think there will be a deal, but I'll repeat what I said last podcast. Investors, listeners, you should pretend as if there's not, because there's going to be, I think, a media campaign to talk about this deal and what a good deal it is for the United States and how it's going to further U.S. interests. And really, I think the Chinese will just do what they did in the Phase 1 trade deal, which is they'll make the deal, they'll say all the right things, they will buy and sell the things that they want to buy and sell. But if you look at the Phase 1 trade deal, China purchased 58% of its commitments. So, like, they're just going to say one thing and then do whatever they want in the context of the deal, and they'll continue, like, going forward in a non-trade war footing because they were willing to appear weak or to not play the cards or do the other things. That is, I think, kind of where we're headed. And I just think that there's a real trap here for investors, for normal listeners, for producers, manufacturers. Like, the deal is going to be hollow even if it's going to be there. I keep on banging that drum.
Let me, so I want to expand on something on our fundamental disagreement here, because I think it's very interesting. Effectively, I am in a very hawkish camp, the China hawk camp, in that I think that U.S. still has the upper hand. You're saying, like, well, no, it's more nuanced than that. And I want to expand on that. But while I'm expanding on it, can you do something?
Let me just see.
Can you go to the Polymarket website and check what was the Trump-Xi visit on October 10th? Like, I'm just really, I just want you to give us I want to see if we could have made some money by, like, saying that, when he freaked out on October 9th, right? And then we had a sell-off. Like, that's Okay. You find that out and then tell me. I just want to riff on one point though that I think is interesting. Let's say that we have someone in the national security world listening to our debate here. They're 100% like Marco's crushed it. Like he's right. Jacob's wrong. We will rebuild it. And then we'll get Vietnam to build what we can't build. So this goes back to my point, though. Don't be listening to our objective points. Everything is relative to pain tolerance. And I just think that that's a really important point. You cannot assess anything objectively in absolute terms. It has to be relative to pain tolerance. So a complete decoupling, and many, by the way, of our listeners are in that camp. I know on Twitter, on X, they come at us like, decoupling will happen. It's like, fine, yes, US has the upper hand right now. Okay, semiconductors, number one. Number two, we're the final demand. Like, good luck stimulating your own demand for all the crap you build and overbuild the Chinese, that being the Chinese. Most of your workers work in industries. They make toys, toaster ovens, and freaking t-shirts. Like, yeah, they're going to be unemployed. So the problem is that China subjected its country and its population to 2 years of zero COVID, just for lulls. We couldn't deal with like a 6-month recession without showering our people with money. And so this is where, if you're listening to this debate and you're like, I'm with Marko, just remember something very important. Americans are not. Americans would not be cool with that. It's unsustainable. And it requires China to commit an egregious act of geopolitical violence, and they haven't done it. This is something that I think a lot of China hawks, your problem. If you're in the administration, you're listening to this. If you're out of the administration, whatever it is, if you're a policymaker listening to a podcast, you're like, Marco's right, we should be harder on China. Okay, but China hasn't justified that kind of behavior, that kind of sacrifice from America. And all we need to go on is like Graham Allison's book or John Mersheimer's thinking that eventually we're going to have an epic battle with China. Like, you know what? American voters are not going to be cool with that level of effort for the sake of defeating a rival that, quite frankly, over the past 25 years, I mean, like I said before, I think when we started our podcast, one of the first episodes, what did I say? If China was a Hollywood villain, we would have had to fire them because they're just not that good. We would have to be like, hey, Putin, can you drop that TV show you've got going on in Ukraine and come to the main stage? Because these guys are just not good enough as a villain.
Yeah. No, I think that point is so important, and I think it points to a fundamental misunderstanding between West and East and between sort of European-style geopolitics and China-style geopolitics. And I sent you an article from Kaiser Kuo at the Sinica podcast, which was talking about China at the forefront of modernity. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, the way China does not think about geopolitics the way that the United States or European or even Russian analysts think about it. Their goal is to not fight the battle. Like, they're going to think about this in fundamentally different terms. And I think the United States is waiting for them to behave like a European nation state. Exactly. And China is not going to behave like a European nation state. If you think that, you have sort of misjudged yourself. By the way, so I finally got the Polymarket thing up about Xi Jinping. The question that they have is, who will Trump meet with in October? And then there's a list of individuals, and it's yes or no based on all the individuals. But if you double click on Xi Jinping, this is incredible. I wish we had known this earlier this month.
Yeah.
On October 1st, it was September 30th, 74% chance yes. By October 4th, it had crested at 93% yes. There's going to be a Xi Jinping Trump meeting in October. Like, that's the question. After October 9th, it declined all the way down to 32%.
Oh, yes. We should have bought it.
And since then, it has slowly climbed back up to 92% as of today.
What an opportunity lost.
This is a proof of concept, because you and I would have still said I think we even said back on our podcast around this time that there's still going to be a meeting. We're not particularly worried about
Jacob,
this.
we could have made real money for our listeners.
For our listeners, what you did for
us.
Ourselves? We're going to make the money for ourselves and then tell our listeners about it. See, the elitist in me coming out.
Homework, homework for the next podcast. You and I should come with one Polymarket trade based on current stuff. that's in the market. Can that be a homework?
Yeah, it can be our homework. Although we need to make sure that somebody at Polymarket is listening to this, because if you're good at something, Marco, in
Why
the
do it
words
for
of Don
free?
Draper, you should never do it for free. So, yeah.
You're
So,
right. Yeah. So
but no,
okay.
I think it's fun. I think it's fun. Okay, let's close.
Wait.
I know. Oh no.
Wait.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Wait. This is your favorite one, so I'm just gonna let you cook on this because you really, really love this one. But I just
great.
opened CNN.com for
Oh god.
shits and giggles, and it's like we're sending an aircraft carrier to the Caribbean, which is
Oh god.
that would be like saying like, I mean, I you're not sending an aircraft carrier to the Caribbean. Caribbean's already there. You know what I mean? Like you can fly to it without. It's okay. Anyways, what do you think? Isn't there a polymarket bet on this issue that you wanted to talk about?
There is. There's a question about whether there will be U.S. forces in Venezuela by either the end of the month or the end of the year. It's 4% yes by the end of the month and 26% yes by the end of the year.
I want to short the other one.
You want to say that there's not going to be U.S. forces in Venezuela?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm worried about this, Marco. Actually, on my own podcast, I have a recording scheduled next week with somebody who's an expert in Latin American politics, and I want to talk to him about this because and one of the points that he's made to me as we were corresponding back and forth about the episode we're going to do. He's now in the United States, but he sort of makes the points that it would be really good for the Trump administration to have a war right now. That would be nice to distract from the inflation numbers and to distract from the government shutdown and everything else. And if you go after, if the war is not against China, but if it's against the drug traffickers, which the polling says people like when you blow up drug traffickers, that's a story that works well with the median American voter. Like this would make sense. I joked, I can't remember if I joked on our podcast or somewhere else about this, but I'll make the joke again. I mean, you also probably saw that Colombia recalled its ambassador from the United States because they claim one of the boats that was blown up recently was Colombian, and then Trump went back and forth against Petro. They hate each other. And I joked, maybe Polymarket should be setting the odds on will there be U.S. forces inside Colombia? Are we invading Venezuela? Are we invading Colombia? Are we going back to when it was Greater Colombia or whatever they used to call it back then? I don't know, but I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand because there's already been, we've got a Marine Expeditionary Force that's been deployed. We've got F-35 Squadron in Puerto Rico. Louisiana has been in the news because apparently we're flying B-52s from Louisiana just to, wave and say hello. But by the way, I think it's hilarious that we're using stealth bombers as a show of force against Venezuela. Like the whole point we spent all this taxpayer dollars was so that you couldn't see them. So you're flying them so they can't see them. This is the Larry David moment for me. Like, what are you doing? Just get Tom Cruise in an F-16 or something like that and put it on Twitter and fly that near Venezuela. That would probably be much more effective. Anyway, I digress. But I'm a little worried about this, Marco. I'm a little worried that the Trump administration is going back to the first administration policies around Venezuela when they did a really aborted version of this. I'm worried they haven't read their history about the Bay of Pigs. I'm worried that they're over-indexing on the capacity of local populations to overthrow governments. This makes me nervous. Please tell me why I shouldn't be nervous about this. I would sleep better tonight if you have a reason I shouldn't be.
So first of all, continuing to attack boats that allegedly carry, drugs into the U.S. Is that a war? Or is that just tick up in law enforcement operations? Right?
Yeah, but why do you need a carrier battle group to do that?
But why do you need an aircraft, the carrier battle group, to do something that F-35s out of Puerto Rico's can do?
Yeah, easily. We've already got plenty of forces in the region.
Right. It's our Mediterranean. So why am I saying this? It's one of those things that when I see it, I'm like, this is so stupid. You don't need a carrier in the Caribbean. It's the Caribbean. I can go to it with a 4-hour flight. We all do. We've all been to Jamaica. It's not the Straits of Malacca. It's the Caribbean. So to me, this is made for TV bullshit, I gotta say. I think you don't need any of this stuff. It's like B-52s, not stealth, but sure, yes, I'm sure they also flew some stealth bombers too. It doesn't matter. Like it's such a superfluous
Yeah,
show
sorry,
of force.
I misspoke there, but yeah.
But it doesn't even matter. It like like I think, okay, first of all, let me separate. Like that's why I started off with the boats, because I think that is something that Trump will probably continue. That will be his. Remember when Obama like droned everyone he could find on a map?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think this is Trump's droning. Obama used drone attacks as a way to kind of furnish credentials as a hawk, which he was in short supply of. Obviously, he did win the election in 2008 on the premise that the war was stupid, but he also had to kind of like tip his hat to the national security establishment and do some droning. I think Trump is kind of doing the same with the boats in the Caribbean. And I want to segregate that from the invade Venezuela part, because I think that it's really difficult to see how it would lead to regime change. That's I guess where I'm going with this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see if we can get our podcast editor to. I want some smooth jazz to play right now, because Marko, I want to play a little game of role play with you. So maybe we get that smooth jazz going. And Marko, you are Nicolas Maduro. Your head of intelligence has just come to you and announced that, or saw on X. I can't believe that we find these things on X. Saw on X that a Pentagon spokesperson said that the U.S. is deploying the USS Gerald Ford and its aircraft carrier group to the region to, quote, bolster U.S. capacity to detect, monitor, and disrupt illicit actors and activities that compromise the safety and prosperity of the United States homeland and our security in the Western Hemisphere. Mr. Maduro, how are you reacting to this news?
If I was President Maduro, I'd be like, oh shit, they're coming for me. But as his advisor, I would say, President Maduro, stop watching Fox News. Stop reading the New York Times. Stop, President Trump is a master of, as you said yourself, of visuals. And I just have to believe that he's getting enough advice that you cannot cause regime change from the air. I mean, you and I talked about this with Iran. I don't know why we would deviate on this issue. Who is going to overturn Maduro in the government? You cannot do
at this
it
point. It would have to be a military coup. I mean, I think that's the only answer to who would overturn Maduro.
But imagine the sustained operations that the U.S. would have to do this. So I'm going to assume, let's just assume you cannot just kill Maduro himself very quickly. In order to truly compel the regime to revolt against Maduro, which apparently for the past 25 years hasn't worked, I'm somewhat surprised. I'm somewhat surprised that it hasn't worked for a very long time, that the Chavez and then Maduro regimes have been, we've all written, you and I have probably written 4 reports on this for our clients, and maybe we were wrong 50% of the time. I know I was. So why, you would need to sustain operations against Venezuela at a very high level for, weeks. We're talking destruction of infrastructure, civilian and military. That would be a problem, I think, particularly since President Trump, the one thing that he did make a significant deal about was that he wasn't going to start, these kind of forever wars. And then, I mean, how is he going to look when he starts bombing critical civilian infrastructure in order to force the regime to eject Maduro? Because I don't see how this is clean and easy.
Yeah, not to say nothing of the cost for it. Although now that we're buying Argentine pesos in a currency swap, we can buy whatever we want. We're going to be rich on those Argentine pesos. If I'm Maduro, I mean, I think the question is, do you start converting all of your money to Bitcoin and calling
Yes.
Vladimir and being like, is there a direct flight to Moscow? Can I get the Assad flight on hold here? Because I think I'm okay, but I think I'm going to start doing some contingency planning. I think that's what I would do. And for me, there's 2 scenarios. I think you're right about a single carrier battle group is usually a signal. You're not going to undertake the type of operation you would have to undertake against Venezuela with a single carrier battle group. I think that's more about sort of telegraphing, a strong political stance. I would sit up in my chair if a second gets deployed.
But I wouldn't. But Jacob, again, but it's so close.
Well, two things there. If I'm Maduro, I'm taking the flight to Moscow if there's a second. Like, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge at that point.
Okay.
If we're you and me, like, okay, like, yeah, I think that we're probably still right. But the flip side of that is, remember that sometimes governments make mistakes. Look at the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs was a moronic plan, and we still went ahead with it. So I won't put it past this administration to try something with a single carrier battle group, or to try something that they think will be easy and won't be that easy. We've been talking, by the way, about the bureaucracy and how it's still involved. If you look at the folks that are advising President Trump on Venezuela, I mean, guys like Elliot Abrams, like we're talking straight neocons. Like, yes, Mr. Bolton is going to get strung up on whatever charges they're going to string him up on, but like we're still talking neocon foreign policy 101. And these are the same guys that brought us the Iraq War, in which, hey, we're just going to do it light and quick and fast, and we're not going to have to be there that long. We're just going to blow up a bunch of shit, and then everybody's going to hate Saddam, and there'll be a liberal democracy in the in the middle of the Mesopotamian fertile valley where human civilization began, and they'll all be thanking us. Like that was not so long ago that we did that. So you can imagine like a similar mistake.
Right, but okay. So the counter to that would be the 5 years of President Trump's track record, where he has favored short, brutal, but finite displays of military dominance. So whether it was using tomahawks against Assad's airbase at the beginning of his first term, whether it was blowing up Fordo, these are very short, very limited, because I think he understands his base, and I think he understands domestic politics, that there's no appetite for prolonged military operations. And I just don't see why, out of all the things going on planet Earth, Jacob, why he would reach for that thing that he has hesitated to use in 5 years. And I find that a lot of liberal media and liberal analysts just ignore that we have 5 years of empirical track record with Trump. Like, we just pretend like the first term never ended and it shouldn't be analyzed because it was different then, Like, look, this guy has not committed the neocon mistake in 5 years. And I just find it interesting that he would do so in a country that just, like, what's the upside? Like, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of natural resources that Venezuela has, and great, it'll be a great place to do business if pro-American, regime is in charge. But the chances that it will be successful are also low, because regime change doesn't happen from the air. It requires either a domestic force you're helping, like in Libya, or, by the way, great example. Great example, because that turned out fucking awesome. Or it requires you to actually commit troops for the regime change. And so, I don't know, like, it just seems odd, right? So, okay, but let's put money on it. Not money like me and you betting, but like, what's your odds?
I just want to add. I want to add one. I'll give you my odds. I want to add one thing and then give you a counterfactual. The one thing I want to add is, the other thing that doesn't make sense here is, if you were seriously considering going after Venezuela, you know what you wouldn't do? You wouldn't piss off your top security partner in South America that is right next door.
Oh, yeah.
Like, why are you picking a fight with Colombia if you're about to go into Venezuela? You're going to need some Colombian help. Like, not a good time to tell them to go fuck themselves, which is basically what the Trump administration has done. The counterfactual I want to throw at you, which is, you are right that Trump has never made the neocon mistake while he, in either of his terms so far. And we have to give him credit for that. But I think he came pretty close with North Korea. And this goes back to my thing about carrier battle groups. He deployed 2 before, remember the fire and fury, and my rocket's bigger than your rocket.
Button.
And based on,
button.
The button.
I know rocket is more phallic, I understand, but it was the button, just to be,
It was the button, the bigger button than you have.
PG-13.
Well, I mean, according to South Park, it's probably smaller than a button. But anyway, I'm probably, Brendan Carr is going to go at me if he hears this podcast for that statement. Anyway, but, I knew some folks who were around U.S. policy at that point who said, we were a lot closer to going after North Korea than even the media reported. Like, everything was drawn up, we were sort of ready to go. And then President Trump pulled off. And I think that, oh God, well, that was unintentional. I'm sorry.
You're just an extended metaphor. This is an extended metaphor, but go on. So he pulled out the time.
Yeah, he pulled out in time, but I think it was because he wanted something from Kim Jong-un that Kim Jong-un could give him. He wanted the photo op and, the things that were moving forward. Is there something that Maduro or Venezuela can give him? Or does this have nothing to do with Venezuela? Is it really just they're going to blow up cartels and we're looking at the first U.S. war against, or not the first, the second U.S. war against a non-state actor, which is not going to go well. Like we tried this with Al-Qaeda and jihadism. We did a great job. Let's do it now against the cartels. Like, not going to work.
A couple of great points there that I want to riff off of. First of all, with North Korea, I do not doubt what you brought to the table here, which is that somebody in the U.S. administration told you they were close. But close to what? Was it a neocon mistake or close to Fordo?
Close to kinetic activity that was designed to overthrow the Kim regime. Like full on, we are getting rid of this administration.
Like, okay, well, all right, fine. So there it is. There's an example that it was.
But to President Trump's credit, he didn't do it. Just because there's somebody out there who's willing to tell me that might actually speak to, Trump is a genius. He needed that out there so that Kim knew the button was real so he could get what he wanted. Like, you can make that argument. I'm just saying, like, he considered it.
What I would say is, like, that is, of course, correct. Like, you do need to show the willingness to go all the way. But, like, the other thing is, I don't think that this is... I think that there's many reasons why you want to look strong. What does he want from Maduro was your other point. So there was this interesting journalist exchange, and we can maybe splice it into this or whatever, but I'll send it to you. I don't know if you saw it, where a journalist, I think from some Latin American country, asks him, are you aware that Maduro has offered access to natural resources and government contracts and everything to America? And Trump goes like, yes, they're giving us everything. And the journalist goes like, and what do you think? Yes, they're giving us everything. And then the guy goes like, well, what do you think about that? And Trump says something like, well, this is why you don't fuck with America. Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
You didn't see him actually swear.
No. I was actually thinking on the car ride home from the hospital today, where I took my poor wife, that it's surprising that Trump doesn't curse more. Because I don't actually even remember ever hearing him. Like, I wondered if I was briefing President Trump on something like this. Would he tell me to go fuck myself? Would he tell me that I was full of shit? Because he doesn't actually, like, use that in his normal vocabulary.
Well, here...
He has offered everything. He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to fuck around with the United States. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
It's a total mic drop moment, though. It's he doesn't want to fuck around with the United States. Thank you and good night. I'm done. Like I'm out of here.
And it was in relation to a question from a journalist. By the way, we can definitely splice this. It will sound great. So that bit was what you don't hear on that 11 seconds that we play is the part where the journalist is saying, from what I understand, Maduro has offered you everything you want, like natural resources, probably pulling back on Guyana nonsense that's been happening. So, I mean, it's interesting because if that's true, if that exchange is correct, Jacob, and Maduro is actually disagreeing with me and agreeing with you, like this is close. And Trump makes a deal and flips Maduro from Russia and China, just flips him. And we get our very own dictator in Latin America, which America has a long history of doing. I mean, this will be quite a coup and a feather in the cap of President Trump, because all he had to do was sail an aircraft carrier about as far as all of the cruise ships go anyways.
Yeah, sounds like a platonic ideal of a neoconservative wet dream right there.
But I don't know if
makes sense.
No.
On paper, it's not going to happen in real life.
Time out. That's not what neocons are about, though. I disagree with you. So that's old school realist. This is like Kissinger. But Kissinger is not a neocon. Neocon problem was that they wouldn't stop there. They would be like, Maduro's evil. He doesn't respect liberty and human rights. We need to go. That's why neocons are so much closer to liberal interventionists on the left.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
They're the same. They want to do liberal interventionism without all the help, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, they wanted to turn Iraq into Wisconsin, whereas Trump doesn't want to turn Venezuela into anything that it's different from now. It can remain a dictatorial hellhole as long as it's our dictatorial hellhole, you know? And in that way, I think that's very indicative of the kind of world we're in. I think morality and norms just don't matter that much. So trying to couch your operations in that in those terms, just it's not necessary for foreign policy. And I think that this exchange between the journalist and President Trump is very interesting to me. If this is actually what's going on behind the scenes, and there's actually a negotiations, Jacob, and then your point about 2 aircraft carriers would just probably give America an even better deal, and Trump is just holding out for that, just giving Maduro this place of American power to up the stakes, or not the stakes,
Yeah.
but the bag.
Well, let me put one more thing on the table, which is maybe even a little more cynical, but based on how the administration has behaved, I'm more and more am gravitating towards these types of arguments. You mentioned Guyana. I think that's actually an important one. Nobody would have given a shit about Guyana even 10 years ago, but they discovered, I forget if it was 2017 or 2018. I believe it was ExxonMobil that described it literally as a fairy tale discovery of oil. And Guyana is sort of overnight becoming one of the wealthiest oil countries in the world. I bet in 10 years their GDP per capita will be up.
It was actually 2015. I'm just fact checking as you talk. Go ahead.
Perfect. And Venezuela has threatened to take back some of this territory from Guyana. It's been a constant threat in recent years. You even had Venezuelan mobilization of some troops and security forces in the last 2 years, sort of designed to threaten them. And Guyana has since reached out to the United States and had talks with the United States about security guarantees from the U.S. government. We know that the Trump administration is very fond of fossil fuels, wants more fossil fuels. We know that the U.S. may need more energy in the future due to AI and data centers and things like that. There's a cynical argument to be made here that what Trump really wants is, hey, back off of Guyana. We're tired of this. So you're either going to leave this alone and you're going to start working into this overall fossil fuel picture that we're building, or we're going to find, to your point, another son of a bitch who's going to do the things that we want them to do. And by the way, if you could also curtail some of these drugs and migrant situations, just keep them out of the Caribbean, keep them out of our back door, send them to China for all you want. But we don't want those things. We want to see some tangible progress there. Maybe Maduro comes to the table with that. And maybe that's what Trump is about. Well, and I say that because it goes back to that Peronist sort of corporatist, like maybe there is a deep like market thing that the Trump administration wants that it can get out of this.
Well, look, I think listen. I think you're right, but I think there's an even bigger bag than Guyana, and it's Venezuela itself. So Venezuela went out and decided to implement communism. So the first thing they did is force everyone in their national oil company to wear red shirts. Like if you showed up with like slightly off red, you were fired. So PDVSA, sorry, my brain stopped. PDVSA, like if you're not wearing red, you're fired. All this, there's so many PDVSA engineers and management people running around the world because they're out of a job. But for the last 25 years, hydrocarbon production out of Venezuela has been absolutely terrible. And it's the one part of the sort of hydrocarbon story that China's been able to secure over the past 25 years as well. And so I think there's 2 things that America gets from flipping Maduro with just a show of force. The 2 things it gets is, what if PDVSA starts to be a capitalist enterprise again? One that United States of America has equity stake in, whether obvious, overt, or not obvious and covert. You boost the output of energy out of Venezuela, which is something that President Trump is really focused on. The second thing you do is you not necessarily overtly, because I don't think US actually needs this oil, but you basically put China on notice. And here's the notice you send to China. American taxpayers are currently paying taxes with which we secure your oil barrels out of the Gulf, the Persian Gulf. So the Fifth Fleet of the United States of America, that's headquartered in Bahrain, is what secures your supply, Beijing, FYI. So just making you aware of that. Second, the guy in Venezuela, he's our guy now. So you've got, other than Russia, which good luck with you on that one, but other than Russia, we now control 2 of your sources of hydrocarbons. One, because we have our paw in the region with the Fifth Fleet that can close the Strait of Hormuz much better than Iran can. And then the second one, we just flipped Maduro. So I think that there's both a commercial incentive for this, kind of a macroeconomic one. You lower oil prices, Venezuela becomes much better. They just become better at extracting hydrocarbons out of the ground and selling them on the open market. Maybe there's some like tie-in there with ExxonMobil or someone else that gets a piece of that puzzle. But then more importantly, it's also sending China on notice, and it's also doing something else, which I think is interesting. We talk about multipolarity a lot, Jacob. You and I are all both on the same page here. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that China has no way to counter this stuff. Now, granted, Venezuela is in America's backyard, so it's not necessarily fair. But the truth of the matter is this will be now a second conflict or near conflict, or third even, right? I mean, you've got Russian invasion of Ukraine, you've got American and Israeli attacks on Iran, and you've got pressure now on Maduro, where China's just kind of missing in action. Now, all the security hawks and everyone who's been drinking from the Kool-Aid of Western propaganda is going to be angry because apparently China supports Russia in its war against Ukraine. Fucking nonsense. No, it doesn't. How has China supported Russia? It hasn't sold them a single military thing. Russians are out there scrambling for Iranian drones and North Korean 70-year-old artillery shells. The fact of the matter is that in all these conflicts, China's just not chosen the other side, which was the bipolar default notion. Like the Soviets got on the other side of every fight the Americans picked, whether they had a horse in that race or not. And I think that's another thing. So by the way, just to kind of finish cooking on this, it means that if you're out there looking for an ally, China doesn't really seem to want to have a reputation of being willing to help countries when America comes in and bombs them from 30,000 feet.
Well, China doesn't want allies at all. That's another part of their foreign policy. They would prefer not to have any allies whatsoever. They want assets. And but it also, like, China's only missing in action if you think that they want Venezuela as a prize. I don't think they do. I think they looked at Venezuela years ago and said, there's bad ROI on this. We don't want this. If you want to see where China has really done well in Latin America, look at what's happening in Peru. Look at who owns Peruvian port facilities. Look who's building out Peruvian infrastructure. Look at countries like Brazil and Peru and even Argentina. Look at what their terms of trade look like and who they're trading with and who their most important trading partners are. Like, China has very quietly usurped America's position from an economic sense. So for China, if the U.S. is going to get bogged down in some nonsense in Venezuela, they're probably like, be our guest. Like, we're doing other things. The last thing, Marko, I'll say on this, in homage to Bill Simmons, he's got Conspiracy Bill. Can Conspiracy Jacob come out here for a second?
Yes.
Conspiracy Jacob has a thought. Listeners, I have no evidence for what I'm about to say. This is a crazy inference. I would put the chances of this at fairly low right now, but of course, if this is right, I'm going to take a victory lap and say I thought of it. Marko, what if all of this around Venezuela and drug trafficking, Colombia, what if it's all misdirection? And really, really what we're talking about is a U.S. invasion of Cuba. Yeah. And Cuba is the real 51st state. And we're going to take back what we should have taken back in the first place. We're going to rectify that little situation. Crazier things have happened.
That would be a misdirection.
You're looking south. We're looking north. Like, we're going to take, and Cuba also. I mean, on very weak footing. I mean, you had major protests there a couple of years ago. The old guard is dead, so it's the replacements for the revolutionary regime. They're all buying Bitcoin there because, the peso or whatever it is worthless,
The old ghost screenplay, you come to set the pick and then you split before you even set it. What a good move. Yeah.
Anyway, Conspiracy Jake.
I don't know what it is, but let's put some money on the table. So, like, what I mean by that is Polymarket bet is 34%, you said, by the end of the year?
It's 4% by the end of the month. And then for the end of the year, it is...
How do they define forces, by the way?
They don't. I'll have to open that up. By the end of the year, they said 26%.
26.
And I think we should define it very simply. Like forces means any U.S. kinetic activity against Venezuela. That's how I would define it. So whether it's U.S., bombing Venezuela, invading Venezuela, like all those things would count. In my mind.
Look, I actually think that you've kind of moved my line on this with your argument. So I think I see that number as more fair than I did like.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. There actually is I didn't click the more button. So here's the rules. This market will resolve to yes if active U.S. military personnel physically enter Venezuela at any point in the time period. Military Special Operations Forces qualify, however, intelligence operatives do not count.
Okay.
U.S. military personnel must physically enter the terrestrial territory, not the extraterrestrial territory of Venezuela to qualify.
I like this.
Entering Venezuela's maritime or aerial territory will not count. Military contractors, advisors, high-ranking U.S. service members for diplomatic purposes do not qualify.
Nice. I love whoever wrote this. Well done. I would still say that yes, I think you've increased my thinking here. But what I would say is I'll still take the under.
And by the way, just as we've been talking in the course of this podcast, the chance by the end of October has gone down to 3%, which makes sense. We're another day closer to Halloween. The chance by December 31st has gone up 1%. So from 26 to 27%, just as we were talking. And we haven't even released the podcast yet, so we can't take credit for that.
Sick. Okay. Well, I'll try to make 26 cents on a dollar by the end of the year. And will you try to play the up?
I'm going to punt because I have a conversation with somebody whose opinion I really trust on this coming next week, and I feel like until I've spoken to him, I only have conspiracy Jacob. So right now, I would say it's a stay away, but next week I might have a stronger point of view. So I guess here today, if you put a gun to my head, I would not play the odds. But let's check in next week after I talk to my guy, and we'll see how I'm feeling. But I have been afraid, this has been triggering my spidey senses. I've brought this up the last 4 weeks on all of our podcasts, sort of started as a joke and it's getting progressively more serious. I mean, the Overton window on this is changing rapidly.
What was the movement in that market over the last 4 weeks? Let's take a look. We have made some money.
Yeah. So over the last over the last month, wow! At the start of the month, on September 30th, it was a 27% chance by the end of October. That rapidly declined within the first week of October to 4 to 5%. It's been hovering around there except for a spike on October 10th to 18%. So it spiked up to 18% and then back down in the doldrums in this sort of 4 to 5% land. So interesting.
So kind of flat.
Flat, except for it started really, really high at the beginning of the month, and then we had a pretty significant spike between October 10th and October 12th. There was a huge spike on the yes side.
Okay, interesting. Well, that's something that we can definitely play. That's interesting. Okay, well, I'll take the under and hold it.
There's also, by the way, I just found a separate one, which is not I like the one that we just talked about because it's much more narrowly defined. There's another one that is just U.S.-Venezuela military engagement. So this is military engagement between military forces. This can be any incident, whether it's missile strikes, artillery, gunfire, blah, blah, blah. That, by December 31st or through the end of the year, is 62% yes.
Ooh, that's juicier. But that's nice. All right. I think that's a way to pick up some coinage. Interesting. Yeah. I like it.
All right. Well, we got to go. But before we leave, I mean, we're talking about Polymarket and things like that. You got any comments about Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones and the new gambling scandal afflicting the United States? How about that for a segue?
Yeah. So listen, one thing that I was thinking about that actually before we started the pod. So Chauncey Billups was not involved in any betting on games, right? He was basically, allegedly, he was part of the ring where they were trying to just bring in big money rookies into a card game because you get to play against Chauncey Billups and then you lose all the money you brought to the table. From what I understand.
Well, yeah, and they had all these crazy things to rig the game and things like that. Allegedly, of course. He is mentioned on the other side for one thing. There's a game, I forget what year it's in. It's a single game where all of the Portland Trail, it was basically Dame was still in Portland, and it was basically the first game where they started to tank, and it was did Chauncey Billups tell someone that the starters were going to be sitting because they were tanking. So he's mentioned in both. I think the bigger accusations are on the poker side, to your point, but there is one game that they're looking at suspiciously for where they sat all the starters.
Okay, so a couple of reactions that I have. First of all, now with Chauncey Billups under this investigation, I think it's a huge loss for the Blazers because he was obviously a big part of their tanking. How will they tank without Chauncey as the head coach? The second thing is like Terry Rozier. I mean, like, wow.
Scary Terry.
I mean, he was like, again, the funny thing is people talk about the integrity of the NBA and how will this affect the integrity? Like Steph Curry was asked this question, which is totally unfair. Why are you asking Steph about this idiotic like stuff? I mean, the integrity of the NBA is already affected by the fact that players don't dress for games, like randomly. And second of all, because of tanking. And I mean, like, integrity as a product, as an entertainment product. There's a reason nobody watches games. Even hardcore fans like you and I, like 10-minute highlights are more than enough. There's too many games. Nobody dresses for them. They don't seem to matter. Home courts have completely evaporated as important. So even getting into the playoffs in the higher seeds doesn't seem to really matter anymore. And so, I mean, I think that's far more important. And I think that's the reason it's becoming more and more likely. It's not just the fact that the proliferation of betting has increased. I don't think that's the only reason. I think the other reason is that it is so much easier to throw a game today than it was in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, I gave up my Pelicans season tickets, number one, because the Pelicans suck, but number two, because it was last year, I think. I wanted to go to a game against the Warriors because I wanted to see Steph, and I get to the arena, and 2 hours before they're supposed to play, Steph's out. Like, they're going to rest him. And it's like, well, I didn't come here to watch. It must have been before last year because it was Jordan Poole. Like, I didn't like decide to spend my evening here watching Jordan Poole play ball hog. If I wanted to do that, I could just go to the J and watch somebody else do that. Like, I came here to see Steph, and I didn't even know until I got there that Steph wasn't going to be playing. So I take your point there.
No, I think it's interesting, and I think it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But by the way, the season has tipped off, and I got
great start.
It's a great start. Wemby looks better than I thought anybody could really look. I mean, it's gotten to a point where, like, I don't think you can really stop him on drives. Like, if he wants to go in there and dunk, he's going to dunk on your head. It's like peak Giannis, but 5 inches taller. Like, it's insane. I mean, the Spurs might actually be like a contender 4 years earlier than anybody thought. And what's his name? Castle. Holy crap, he looked good. And, of course, very depressed. My Lakers look terrible.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
They look terrible. I think you and I are honestly qualified to play defense on that team right now. And it's like they remind me of like a team where like a really good player shows up for the regular Saturday morning run late and has to be on the team full of rejects and then just doesn't care. He's like, okay, cool. I'm going to get my cardio in and I'm going to take every shot. Because, like, in a weird way, I think Luka's going to average, like, between 8 and 10 assists, but he will still not actually be playing with his teammates. Like, I don't think – it's like they're playing a different sport, and then he gets assists because he, like, draws 3 people and throws it to them. But it's not team basketball. That's what I'm getting at. They're, like, fundamentally, they're not playing team basketball. They have no defense. I feel very, very concerned about them. And then finally, I saw an uptick. Like, the Mavs stock has been trending higher over the past couple of months, really propagated by Bill Simmons, who thinks Flag is the coming of, like, white Jesus. And I just want to say, like, I really don't think the Mavs are going to be good. Anybody who thinks that somehow believes that a 34-year-old Kyrie Irving is going to come back from an Achilles tear at 100%, and then you have to create a really small Venn diagram of people who also have now watched AD for the past 5 years of his career.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, AD is definitely going to get hurt. I take your point, by the way, on on Luka. I mean, I feel pretty good about my assessment of Trae Young's career, but I thought Luka was going to be great, and he's got to learn how to be a team player. It's also difficult, and this I think is a real knock against LeBron's legacy. Like, he's at a different stage of his career, and he could be like the elder statesman who gets another championship or two by being the best glue guy, fourth option that there possibly could be. But he's just not willing to go there. Like, he thinks he's going to be an alpha as long as he's the alpha. He's offended by the presence of Luka on the team, and it's just not a good look. And
Allegedly.
I get it. Like,
But
the things that made LeBron so good, I guess, make it unable for him to consider that he's not the player that he once was. But it's not a good look for him.
So listen, I want to just double click on this. I know we got to go, but I just want to expand on this. I think this is also a professional thing. Like, this is a human capital issue. There's a lot of people who are like high performers throughout their careers, and then their career gets into a different stage. If they're not willing to cede the limelight and potentially even take a pay cut, they end up being, one of these independent consultants that nobody actually wants around. And this, especially in our profession, I think it's in many ways similar to that. I think you want to be part of the team, you want to have talent to draw on, but at some point your role has to transition from being the star, once you hit your late 50s, early 60s, to being the more of a mentor. And that does require you to also be okay with a pay cut. And what LeBron James has shown is that he's not willing to do that. I mean, that's one of the things that he's saddled the Lakers with, is his egregious contract. Now, here's a counter to this. The great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I had a debate, best 5 Lakers ever, and I took both Magic, Kobe, Shaq over Kareem. Not as a player, obviously not. That would disqualify me from ever talking about basketball. Kareem is one of the GOATs. But as a Laker, like, Kareem shows up at 32, I think, or 31. He doesn't win a title without Magic, and clearly knows how to play that secondary role, on occasion dominating when the matchup required it. But Kareem actually seamlessly became that second fiddle, if you will, and he won 5 titles because of it. Great career in the second half of his output, and it was purely because he knew how to adjust his performance to the reality at hand. And so, yes, I do think Magic is a greater Laker than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, even though, of course, Kareem had a better career overall. What do you think about that?
No, I have nothing to. Yeah, I have no rejoinder to that. The only thing I can add to you is that I just want to. I'm not getting sucked in yet, but Zion looks skinny.
He does.
Then again, the Pelicans literally a couple hours ago signed DeAndre Jordan for depth. So I'm going to go gag myself with a spoon right now. All right. Anything else you want to tell the listeners, Marko?
No, I think for now, this is it. I think it's a long season. We'll see where it goes. And let's see where those polymarket moves come back. And let's not forget, we've got to come back with some trades. Oh, one last thing I want to say. Ontario is going to stop running the anti-tariff advert that angered Trump.
So if maybe Trump will say, okay, great, negotiations are back on.
Well, listen, at the end of the day, Ontario should just focus on what actually matters over the next couple of days. And we all know what that is. That's Jays versus Dodgers. It is,
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is where it's at, and I think it's going to be a great series. I think everyone's writing off the Jays, but they're plucky, and they're going to give the Dodgers, I think, a run for their money.
No, I think they have a real chance, but I was in Seattle when Seattle lost, and I was rooting for Seattle. That was a real nice underdog story.
I was rooting for the Dodgers. I was rooting for the Dodgers, but against the Jays, I'm all in on Jays. So they are my.
Oh wow!
They're my baseball team, and if I was hoping that the game 1 of the series would be in LA so that I could squeeze in game 1 of the World Series and then go to the airport. Unfortunately, it's in Toronto, so I will not be able to go. But I am sending my 12-year-old. As a reward for being a good boy to game 3. So, and I'm sending him decked out in Jays gear. So hopefully he comes back from the stadium.
I'll tell you a funny story before we get out of here. The sports franchise I care the most about, far more than any basketball franchise or football franchise, is is the Atlanta Braves. They're the one team that really can move my heart in a direction. And Game 6 against the Astros, I was supposed to be in Puerto Rico. I was in Puerto Rico with a client. And so I got to where I was going and I wanted to watch the game. And the only way I could get the TV to work was I literally had to stand next to the TV and hold an antenna in a very specific position, because otherwise it would go sort of haywire. So for 6 innings, I was just like sitting here like this, like kind of slouched to the side, like holding this antenna up. I had a terrible stiff neck the next day, but it was wonderful to watch the Braves beat the Astros in Puerto Rico. So the things we do for love.
Bayless will never listen to this podcast again. Shout out to our.
He won't?
Shout out to our friend.
Oh, yeah.
Big Astros fans.
Whatever.
So, yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Like, karma, Bayless. Like, cheaters eventually get what they deserve.
All right.
All right. On that note, cheers, y'all.